In this video, we're going to look at Rachel Alucard, one of the brand new characters for BlazBlue Entropy Effect.
The wheel of fate is turning. Action!
If you don't know the game, BlazBlue EE is an action roguelike game where you play as characters from the BlazBlue fighting game. In this case, Rachel. I don't know how popular she is, but she was added as a DLC character very recently. So we're going to tell you everything you need to know to play Rachel at her absolute best. Rachel's probably one of the more complicated characters of the game, and I think she has maybe some of the most buttons out of the entire roster. So to give you an idea of what base Rachel plays like, she has a 3-hit combo. The first hit throws out a tornado. You can just keep the tornado up if you want. If you do the 3-hit combo, however, it pops and then a dagger will come down. Overall, I think this does more damage, but if you want to maintain that crowd control, you can just leave the tornado up, and there's some like splashy stuff you can do with that. This may be one of the only characters in the game that has another basic attack. If you press up and attack, she'll actually throw out these rods. The rods are called tiny lobelia. At base value, she can have 3 of these up at a time. There are potentials that let you get more. What these do is they actually interact with her skill, which is a lightning bolt. The lightning bolt is on your own character. It doesn't cost a ton of MP. I think it's designed to be spammable. But with staffs out, each staff locally will have its own lightning. The skill can be done in the air. Pretty much everything can be done in the air. Her aerial attack also puts her in this umbrella state. There is utility to that. I'm gonna get to that a little bit later. And while I've been saying all of this, one thing I didn't mention is that she has these bats that spawn. You don't have to do anything to make that happen. She just passively generates bats, and then when you have an enemy close to you, the bats will go for it. As you can see, Rachel has probably the worst walk speed in the game. I imagine Hakumen is like the actual slowest, and she must be second slowest. However, she does get a really nice dash attack. Her dash attack sends her propelling forward, does multiple hits, and drags enemies along with you so long as they have the ability to be picked up. This has some really good synergy with her skill, where you can gather enemies and then press the skill button and do lightning bolt immediately. You can try to like stack lightning rods in the corner, the lobelia, spin, and then get multi-hit on the lightning. And then finally, her charge attack sends out a charged sword forward. I don't use this very often. It just is an option for you if you happen to do it. So that gives you an incredibly brief look at what Rachel can actually do. So let's talk about what Rachel wants to become throughout the game. So as I said, this is a roguelike game. Your goal is to be able to make a Rachel that can do tons of damage and actually plays like the Rachel from the fighting game. Now, you don't have to be a fighting game expert to play Rachel. Even though she has a lot of buttons, I think there's a lot of different ways to play her that makes it not too difficult to just pick up and master. If you've never seen BlazBlue, you're pretty much building a character based on potentials and tactics that you pick up. The different ways that you can play Rachel, I think that you're really focusing on a few different movesets. You can be basic attack focus, you can be lobelia focus. This might also correspond to being a skill focus, doing whatever this thing is, or doing whatever this thing is. So let's look at boosting up Rachel's primary attack. So by default, her ground attack does a 3-hit combo. You can actually augment it to have the first whirlwind remain for longer and will continually hit the monster for as long as you keep it out. If you were to throw out one whirlwind and just wait, your next whirlwind will cancel it. The amount of time it takes for you to actually weave in a combo, it's fairly long, but don't think you can keep that thing out indefinitely and then end the combo. You always have to make a new tornado to finish it off. There's some really cool ideas that you can use with that. One of them is using a skill called Sylpheed. Sylpheed uses SP, and it's another thing that you would have gotten from a potential. This allows you to move monsters around, including yourself. And if you happen to get this potential, you can move your tornado with the press of the summon button. For me, the default button is R1 on my controller. That means in order for me to do this Sylphy tornado combo, I'm pressing square to start a tornado, and then up R1 or left or right R1 to move the tornado around. It's a very flashy way to play, but probably a lore accurate combo. I can't say for sure that this is the right path to go for building her, but if you want to go this route, there's lots of tactics that will support it. Next up is her skill. This thing is called Sword Iris. I don't know why it's sword when it's a lightning bolt that comes down, but I'll just say it's because of anime. You can build this a couple of different ways depending on which potentials you pick up. But just remember that pretty much every potential for Sword Iris also enhances the tiny lobelia that comes out, the rods. So in this case, I have rods that are out. This version causes a lingering lightning bolt to stay on the field so I can move a little bit during that time. If you happen to get the universal enhancement, which allows you to hold down the button for pretty much every ability that she has, the skill can also be held down, can give you air stall, and does additional damage and sometimes additional effects based on the other potentials you have. So for example, I can throw out the rods and then hold down the skill button, and then all of them do my enhanced skill charge. While we're talking about the rods, let's go back for that for a second. The up attack can be augmented in 3 different ways. You can increase the maximum number of rods. You can fire up to 3 rods simultaneously, and the rods can do periodic lightning strikes. At most, you can have 5 lightning rods on the field. Each one can generate lightning strikes, and then when you press your skill button, they will go away instantly unless you have another potential that allows you to keep them up for longer after you do your skill. With potentials, you can see that I actually don't destroy my rods, even though I have basically spamming my triangle button. Rachel's heavy attack, which is holding down the attack button, will generate the sword. Depending on what kind of potentials you have, you can double tap the held sword button to do almost a laser line after. I don't think it's very strong, but it can break super armor. Her charge attack also has a really weird block that's added to it with down attack. Rachel will sit down in a cat chair, block an attack, and then electrocute an enemy either when it ends or if it does a successful counter. It's not as good as Hakumen's counter, but it will block, I'd say, 75% of the attacks in the game. There are instances where I still get knocked back even though I'm doing the block, but I don't take any damage. If you have the potential that allows you to hold actions, you can hold that block indefinitely, and that way it's very easy to do the block compared to Hakumen where you have to time it. Now, as I said, Rachel has a lot of buttons. I already mentioned up attack, down attack. She also happens to have down dash. Down dash is to summon King George, which is a frog. You may think that the frog could be useless, but the frog has one of the most interesting gameplay elements in this entire game due to the fact that it itself will draw aggro from enemies. Even bosses will actually attack King George even though you're on the screen. It's not perfect taunt, but it does help you to alleviate some of the pressure and allows you to fight from range. It's almost like playing 2v1 against bosses. Of course, just like everything else, King George can be enhanced through potentials. George will grow in size, it will do electricity around it. In some instances, you can summon more than one King George if you happen to have the potential to do that. It also has synergy with her chair block button, the down attack. Whenever you exit the block, all of your King Georges will electrocute at the same time. Rachel's other pet comes from Up Dash. Up Dash will throw out tombstones that will spawn bats. The bats have a really interesting gameplay element in that they actually can heal you based on damage that they deal. It's not a ton of life, I'm really only healing single digits per bite. But if you imagine that you are not full HP, even if you're getting like 20 HP per level, by the time you get to a boss, you've already healed like a couple of hundred. So I do think that's pretty impactful. It's also part of that whole summon jutsu gameplay where you can just throw this stuff out from range and just play keep away. You don't even have to be next to your rods to do the lightning. You can do the lightning from far away while the pets are keeping the monster locked up. Now, one button we haven't talked about yet is upskill. Upskill is called Tempest Dahlia, and what it does is it simply pushes monsters forward. This is unusually strong in this game because If any monster can be picked up, then it can be dragged to the other end of the battlefield. It can be thrown into environmental hazards, or you can lock them on top of the tiny lobelia in order to spam your skills. However, that's not all that Tempest can do. With 1 extra point in Tempest Dahlia, you can extend the storm's duration and then actually have free movement during the storm. This becomes incredibly strong, where monsters are just pinned against the wall where you get to do whatever you want. If you're able to get the universal enhancement to hold down the skill button, you can actually change the direction of the storm, either left, right, up, or down. And using up is also incredibly strong, where you get to lift all monsters into the air. The advantage that you have over that is if you don't want all monsters stacked on top of each other, you can essentially do damage directly where they stand without having to have them giga stacked into a corner. There's also gameplay where you can send the monsters directly into you. I don't quite know when you would ever want to do that, but it is an option. As I said, this is probably one of the strongest skills in the entire game because it hits so many times. It has synergies with any kind of skill tactic that's based on moving the monster or based on hitting the monster multiple times. So skill code and skill rend are definitely the best to take here. So after all of those, I have one more button to present to you, and this is actually a lot of buttons. And I don't think any other character has gameplay like this. And it's a skill called Connecting to Congenital Border, which I know sounds really, really wrong, but this is some of the most broken stuff that this character can do. This thing is literally invincibility. However, it requires you to input the Konami code after holding down the summon button. And I don't know about you, but for me, doing Konami code is probably a long input. One thing that you can do to help is you can actually cast it in the air. She gets full air stall, and when you land with the full invulnerability. This lasts for 15 seconds, but the actual cooldown is 45 seconds. And that's a global cooldown. If you happen to have any different variants of this, you cannot use any of them until that 45 seconds is done. You may be wondering, what are the other variants then? The input for that is down, left, down, right, up. Summons a bunch of pumpkins on the screen. Each pumpkin does about 200 damage on impact. This is really good on any fights that are aerial combat. Say, for example, you're fighting against the giant eyeball. Maybe you're fighting against Nan Fire. Or you might just be in an area with a bunch of bats. Either way, you can just throw out the pumpkins and then not worry about any monsters that are overhead. Another version of this is Heckish Gora, up, left, up, right, down. Just like her summon bat, each bat will actually regenerate your life. Again, it's single digits, so if you happen to have a situation where you want to heal up, you might get maybe 100 HP out of it. And then lastly, there's Gale Orcus. This summons tornadoes at the enemy's feet. So as you can see, Gale Orcus is massive. It's just huge. It hits the entire screen, basically, because it activates 3 times. And if it didn't do that, then I probably wouldn't use it as much, and I would just spam either the pumpkins or spam the bats. But 3 tornadoes throughout the 21-second cooldown. I think by the time the 3rd tornado is done, it's probably been 15 seconds anyway. Now, of course, this can be leveled up via potentials, and the potential for this thing increases the duration of the tornado and lets it activate a 4th time. And it's activating for so long that it will actually catch back up to the cooldown. That way you can have perpetual tornadoes if you can really get the combination off. I'd say that's probably the hardest part about this moveset, is actually doing the inputs, especially in the middle of like intense combat. But I think that's where pulling out the frog is gonna help. One thing to keep in mind, however, the tornado does not take on your attack property or your skill property. It does basically its own damage. I think it's supposed to scale off the summon, but clearly summons are their own thing. You can't put that into your own skill. But I think by default, it does do plenty of damage by itself, so you would probably want to pair that with Radiance that increases damage around you. Or you can even pair this with Summon Tentacles, so that way you have some protection while you're trying to cast the spell. So with those, I would say this is another variant to play Rachel. You're either doing skill spam with the rods, summon spam with a mix between George and the bats, Tempest Dahlia, which can be used to push enemies either up or into a wall, or Gale Orcus to have just constant tornadoes all across the map. And then of course, on top of all of that, you're generating SP in order to use her ultimate. I don't really have to go into too much detail on the ulti. The only extra benefit you get out of it is being able to hold the button down and also do lightning bolts around the rods that you put down. For example, I'll start a fight by throwing the rods onto the field, then immediately rush in, press down skill, which gives you iframe, so you're protected against any damage. And then if the boss decides to stay on me, then it'll take a crap ton of damage from both the rods and the ulti at the same time. So if you try your best to build towards Rachel's strengths, then I think you can pilot her all the way to the end of the game. My number one tip for the character is to use aerial combat as much as possible. The amount of air stall this character has is actually pretty ridiculous, and I don't think you can really cast much of her abilities on the ground unless you're using Jin's Ice or Tentacle to protect you. If I were to make a tier list for BlazBlue, I would have Rachel pretty high at the top. If you want to see more of Rachel's gameplay, I'll have a vid up on the screen right here that you can take a look at. If you like BlazBlue and other roguelite games, subscribe to the channel. We play these games all the time. Leave a like on the video. Leave a comment letting me know, is Rachel a character you were excited for? Or is there a different one that you're still holding out hope for? Either way, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on the next video.